There are bragging rights involved when you step in among other surf fishermen at the beach, pull out a common 12-foot rod, and proceed to casually hurl your rig 50 yards past everyone else out into the surf. And it especially feels good when it's a slow day for everyone else, but you're consistently hooking into large chopper blues and over slot reds by having the range to put your bait on the other side of the bar. Now that is par for the course for members of the Carolina Surfcasters Association who compete in the club's long-distance casting tournaments. Here to introduce us to that concept is U.S. long-distance casting legend and Carolina Surfcasters Association President Tommy Farmer. We'll be taking a dive into his full casting credentials in a few moments, but Tommy was the supervisor of operations at a power plant, and to this day is the owner of Carolina Cast Pro, which sells Achios reels, Sakuma fishing line, over the waves sand spikes, and plus his signature line of Cast Pro series surf fishing rods. He also produced his own instructional DVD, The Comprehensive Guide to Power Casting, and he's also available for private casting lessons here in eastern North Carolina where he resides. And you'll find links to his ventures below in the show notes. Let's talk to Tommy Farmer now. Tommy, when I was conceptualizing this small series of interviews with the top figures in the sport of long-distance casting, I wanted to start with two people who, for me and many others, were the most influential, not just in terms of being top performers, but also the top minds, the top instructors, if you will. And in no particular order, that was John Holden, who came to mind, who we interviewed a few months ago, and now yourself, who has developed what I would say is the most straightforward and effective system for learning casting that I've ever encountered. And I've done a lot of research on the topic, but we'll get into that in a minute. Let's start with you, though. What's your distance casting story? Like how you got started in casting, tournament casting, your evolution from amateur to athlete, and what your major accomplishments were in competition.
Well, I really, truly do appreciate you categorizing me with some of the people that I respect and that I came up through the sport respecting. My journey, let me start by saying I'm not a natural athlete. I was a guy growing up. I could play any sport, but I was pretty good at anything I wanted to do, but I was never great. I was not an outstanding all-star collegiate type athlete. That was not me. But my story begins really when I'm in my 20s. I got the surf fishing bug. I started going down to Carolina Beach, which is in southeast North Carolina, in Fort Fisher, which is also in southeast North Carolina. Some pretty good stretches of beach. I knew absolutely nothing, but I knew I enjoyed being out on the beach and enjoyed trying to catch fish, which is all I was really doing back then. That went on through my 20s and 30s. It was kind of my me time, my way to get away from life in the world and relax. I'm going to start this by telling a little story. A lifelong friend of mine, a guy that we've literally been friends since the 5th grade. His name is Tony Pendergrass. Growing up, we competed at everything. We competed in Little League Baseball. We competed in arm wrestling. We competed in chasing girls in high school, racing our muscle cars. We competed at everything. Well, one day we found ourselves out on the beach. We were both in our 30s, probably later 30s. And I threw a cast. Tony threw a cast. We looked at each other like guys do, and we both took credit for having the longest cast. And this went on the rest of the time we were on the beach. We were bantering back and forth. So Tony was always a betting guy. He would bet on pretty much anything, and he would quickly take your money on a pool table. He took my last $10 in high school on a pool table, but that's another story. Anyway, at the end of this beach session, we said, okay, let's meet on the field and we'll decide this. So we decided to meet at the local fairgrounds a few days later, and he proceeded to take $20 again from me, outcasting me on the field. So that was kind of the beginning of it for me, the competition part of it. Tony's 6'5", and at the time probably went 280 pounds, a great big man. And we started going to Sportcast USA tournaments. We found out there was an organization and they actually did this. So we started going to tournaments. Tony was real good. He got real good real fast. He went from just your average guy up into the mid 700s, probably as fast as anybody I've ever seen. My story wasn't that fast. I didn't move along that quick. My first tournament was probably in 98, maybe 99. I can't remember. I remember though standing on the Aki and throwing my first cast. I thought I'd done something. I walked out to the sinker, stood there by it, put my flag in the ground, and watched as guys literally, not figuratively, literally walked 300 feet past me to get to their sinkers. I was at 450 feet. There were guys out there throwing 750. I realized pretty quickly that I needed to do one of two things. I either needed to get another hobby or learn how to do this. So I took that kind of as my direction. I wanted to figure out how to do this. Also, early on, I learned that there were guys, competitive guys, that didn't want to tell you. They didn't want to give you information because they were afraid that you would use that to beat them. So it was kind of a difficult journey. I was able to go to a couple of seminars. I went to a seminar one time that I was lucky Roger Mortimer was there, a famous UK caster, excellent guy, great guy, good caster, which kind of got me started on the learning path. And then a few years later, when I was sort of starting my up and coming path, I attended a seminar with a guy named Peter Thane. He's also a British caster, champion, great guy. He's the one that got through my hard head, my thick skull, how to use your body, the physical mechanics behind the cast. In other words, how to make your body do what you need to do to execute a proper cast. He's the guy that got through my hard head. So on from that, I started winning some tournaments. My accomplishments through this point in time are 49 tournament wins. 15 of those are what I would call major events, which would be a Sportcast USA National Championship, CSCA Championship, JVC or Texas Championships. I traveled to Europe 3 times, competed in 5 different international competitions. I took a top 5 finish in 4 out of those 5 tournaments. And I finished second place in the world in 2006 in, at the time, what was the largest casting event that had ever taken place, the Primo Championship. I finished second to Danny Moskos. To people who know, they know that name. That was in the main event. So that's kind of my, I guess, my resume, my personal story through casting.
And Peter Thane, Roger Mortimer, they were over here stateside?
Yes, they actually, Roger Mortimer came over here. I think it was either 98 or 99. They had what they called at that time Sportcast USA Worlds. And Roger Mortimer came over. Neil McKello came over. Trying to think, there was a famous backcaster at that time, but his name's not coming forward to me. And they came over and competed in a competition here, and they put on a seminar before. Neil McKello wasn't there for the seminar. He arrived the next day. I was not able to go to that tournament, but that seminar was kind of a breakthrough point for me in beginning to understand. Peter Thane came over later to a couple of, he's been over a couple of times. He actually came over and stayed with Kim and I for a tournament we were having here with the CSCA. But I went to a seminar up in the DC area with Peter Thane, and he actually took a lot of time with me. I think he saw potential that was untapped, and he could look and see where I needed specific help. And he And he was persistent enough, like I said, to get through this ultra hard cranium. And he was able to get through to me and help me to understand the mechanics behind the cast.
So and that kind of leads into another question that something I was personally curious about. What your experience interacting with these UK casters and going over there a couple times for tournaments. I was wondering if you'd picked up on any striking differences between the UK casting scene and the US casting scene.
Yes. What I learned over there, it was stark. Over here, everybody was basically trying to do the same thing. Everybody was working on a pendulum cast of some sort. They were, there was some high swing stuff, there was some low swing stuff, or flat arc. Flat arc was more predominant here at that time. It's what I was casting. It's what I used when I went over there. But I went over there with my eyes wide open because I wanted to see what these guys were doing. And what I saw was actually pretty amazing, because it doesn't really matter what your technical style is. And what I mean by that, whether you're throwing a ground cast, whether you're throwing a high swing pendulum, or whether you're throwing a flat arc pendulum, what's important is the execution of the cast, because they'll all throw the same distance pretty much. The people will tell you that you can't throw a ground cast as far, but that's really not accurate. The different styles can be made to throw as far. And I saw that over there. I watched guys completely different styles than what I was throwing. I mean, you had Neil McKellar throwing this beautiful, elegant, high swing pendulum. Then you had guys Danny Moskop is the polar opposite. He's got this short, compact, more of a rocking back and forth motion than a full pendulum, but he smashed it further than anybody in the world at that time. So those are the things that I learned, really, that there's more than one way to skin a cat. That's probably the biggest thing. And that for me personally, what I gathered out of it, when I came back from the UK on that first trip, I spent 2 solid years throwing nothing but a ground cast. I eliminated the pendulum cast from my arsenal for 2 years because I wanted to master that fundamental. I wanted to master the fundamental of throwing a ground cast. And I pretty much did. I came back home and I used it to break the United States record. I broke it with a ground cast. And I also went back over to Europe 2 years later and used the ground cast to finish 4th or 5th in the Big Danny competition, which again was the biggest casting tournament at that time held today, because it was even bigger than the Primo. So the biggest takeaway from it is there's more than one way to skin a cat, and it really does boil down to the fundamentals of casting. Executing properly, you can take any casting style and make it go far.
So someone just now getting into casting is going to find its roots interesting, I think. Can you please give the viewers a history of the long distance casting sport as you understand it? Like, my understanding is that, contrary to popular belief, the United States figures dominantly into that history.
Absolutely.
But please add anything that went on around the world that would help paint that picture.
Okay, long distance casting's got its roots firmly planted in the USA. There were tournaments being held here in the United States back in the 1920s. Starting in the 1930s, a man emerged on the scene and dominated casting for decades. His name was Primo Livanay. His first record cast was 506 feet. I think that was in 37 or 38. And he went on he was the first man, he broke records. He went from the 500s to the 600s to the 700 feet range. And he is the first man that ever cast over 800 feet in competition. Now their rules were different. They had different restrictions on line diameter, but they were also using wooden cane type fishing rods, which still blows my mind. I would dearly love to get my hands on something like that and just give it a whirl to see what it would do. But anyway, after Primo, this went on. Primo cast on up into the 1950s. But what happened, Europeans saw what was going on over here, and they had a greater need for distance than we did. Their beaches are very flat. They've been decimated by overfishing for centuries. So they needed to get out. They needed to get distance. That's where guys like Terry Carroll, Neil McKello, Paul Carey, and John Holding kind of came in to being. They took what guys over here were doing and they elevated it with new technologies, carbon fiber rods, the pendulum cast, which is something that those guys invented and really perfected. Then I think I'm pretty certain it was Neil McKello that first experimented with low reel position versus a high reel position, just as a different dynamic. And it really worked for him, and it caught on and became the predominant method of casting on a field with your reel being controlled by your left or lower hand. The most common cast now is the pendulum. Records fell and were reset. Moving back into the United States in the 80s, Mr. Joe Moore was instrumental in bringing competitive casting back to the United States. He was president of Sportcast USA, and he was very instrumental in bringing casting back here in a big way. There were several of the big name casters that came over and spent time with Joe, and you speak of somebody with stories. Joe Moore has got stories that'll blow your mind about casting, but that's for a different interview. Anyway, that's kind of the history of the sport from my perspective, kind of up from the beginning in the 20s up through kind of modern times.
I guess I had two other questions that I'll kind of combine here about your impressions about how in the, since you started at least observing the sport to today, how has it evolved? And I guess in answering that, can you also tell us a little bit about the team structure?
Yes, I can.
And, what that was like compared to today?
I'm 61. I started casting when I was 39. I was a late entry into the sport. I really wish I'd gotten into it a decade earlier. But it just didn't work for me. I didn't know it existed. So I've been in the game for 23 years. When I started casting, there was only one organization. It was Joe Moore's Sportcast USA. There was a strong following on the East Coast and another group in Texas. It's changed over the decades. Now there are three groups that hold casting tournaments in the United States. There's a group in Texas. There's a group in the Northeast, and then there's the Carolina Surfcasters Association. So we all hold individual type tournaments, and that's where we are now.
Wait, so the group in the Northeast, is that still Sportcast USA?
No, it's called Surfcast USA.
Oh, okay, got it. All right, good. And what year? So Joe Moore started Surfcast USA.
Sportcast.
Yeah.
Yes, he did. It was like an umbrella of different surf casting clubs in the United States, which worked well for a while, but then the clubs kind of fell apart and it became more of of Sportcast USA putting on the tournaments. So that's how it was when I first entered. They did have a Northeast regional, a Southeast regional, another tournament. I can't remember the name of it. And then there was a national championship. That's the way they rolled. That's the way they did it back then. But that was the only game in town at the time. And it was a good one. Joe ran a tight ship. He ran great tournaments. But that's how it was then. And it evolved after that to multiple different organizations putting on tournaments.
Right. So you had Sportcast USA, and then you had different local clubs who presented teams
under that umbrella. And by the time I got into the sport, that had kind of, I don't know the right word, it kind of started to degrade or just wasn't really working. And the Sportcast USA was actually putting on the individual tournaments. And that's when I came to be. Before that, it was a different story, but I can't really comment as to what went on after that. Shortly after I came into the sport, Joe retired and turned it over to some other guys, and it went from there.
So and that's a good segue into your our organization here in North Carolina, Carolina Surfcasters Association. We're hoping this video reaches some surf fishermen and women here in North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and beyond. So if they're not aware, please introduce them to the Carolina Surfcasters Association, like a general
Okay.
history, who's involved, notable accomplishments by members.
The CSCA was formed by Wayne Hill in the late 2000s. He's a friend of mine. He lives down near Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. We had some great tournaments under Wayne, and most all of them were held in either Southeast North Carolina. We had a great field. We called it the Sod Farm. And we held tournaments there for years. It was 80 acres of sod grass, different varieties of sod grass. It was beautiful. That was our home base for quite a few years until the economic downfall in the late 2000s came, and they couldn't make money selling grass because nobody was selling houses. So they plowed it up, planted soybeans. So that was the end of that field. But anyway, Wayne ran it it was like 2008 ish until 2014 through 2013. At the end of 2013 season, he basically told me that if I wanted to run it, that it was mine. Otherwise, he was going to shut it down. So I took it, and my brother and I shouldn't say my brother and I took it, Charlie, and we've run it since 2014. So we're in our eighth season now, and it's been fun. Prominent casters. I had my run. I had a decade pretty much at the top, but there's been other really, really good casters that have competed with us. Will Nash, who holds the current records in the United States. Ryan Lambert, who holds one of those records. I think he took from Will back in the spring, if I'm not mistaken. Mike Langston, Mike was competing when I started. Just has recently retired from competitive casting. Angel Villapando, Tony Bates, who was a friend of mine. He's a guy that he hired me, I don't know, 15 years ago to help his son learn to cast. And while out there, Tony got the bug and trained with me. And Tony ended up, he's one of the members, the elite members of the 800-foot club. And he did it all with ground cast, which really it meant a lot to me to see somebody that I trained get to that level and do it from the ground, which is where the fundamentals lie. That's pretty much it as far as the history. We're still putting on tournaments. It kind of evolved now. We're doing more in the middle of the state in North Carolina, and we also put on some tournaments in Virginia, in the Windsor, Virginia area. We've got a pretty decent place up there that we've been using for several years for our casting tournaments.
Right, and who's showing up to tournaments these days? Do you have the serious crowd, the surf fishermen just looking for some practice?
Well, it's a good mix. Typically, we will have you've got what I'll call the hardcore guys. These guys are going to show up at most tournaments. They're competitive, either at the top level or in their class level. And they take it pretty seriously. These are guys that I can pretty much tell you're going to be there. Outside, and they're going to make up 50 to probably 60% of the guys at a tournament. Then you got the guys that are interested. You got the people who want to learn. A lot of guys are intimidated. The first time that I've heard this many times, I'm just going to show up and watch. And I tell them, no, if you show up, bring your fishing rod, you're going to cast. And they realized quickly that it's not any intimidation that they felt was unwarranted, because the group of people, it's not like they're going to get picked on or looked down upon, because for goodness sakes, I've never forgotten the feeling of that first cast at a tournament and then watching guys walk 300 feet past me. So the key really is to encourage those guys and help them learn to develop the techniques. And it really does come down to technique.
Right, and there's plenty of knowledge to be had at these tournaments.
Oh yeah, these guys between casts, everybody's sitting around under their little pop-up tents talking, and you can gather tremendous amount of knowledge just by being there, by being around it. And you know, the first time you step up to the Aki and throw a cast, it's 1,000 things are going through your head trying to not mess up. But once you get past that, then it's easy. You know, it's fun. And you get to put a mark on yourself. You get to, not a mark, but you get to establish a baseline, and from that point work forward.
I think it's also important for people thinking about going to a tournament to understand that there is a class system to
Yes.
kind of level the playing field and give everybody a shot at a winning position.
Yep.
Can you explain that a little bit?
It helps the class. The classes help people not to feel like that. Okay, say 7-8 years ago when I was at the top, a guy, first coming or his second, third tournament, he doesn't feel like he's competing against me. He doesn't feel like he's competing against Will Nash or Ryan Lambert. He's got people in his classification that he is competing against. Basically, roughly 100-foot increments. We have C class, B class, A class, double A class, master class, and elite class. I don't have written down all of the exact numbers, but it starts around 450 feet for the C class, and the elite class is 800 plus. So it's pretty much everything in between, broken down into 75 to 100-foot increments per class. So, and we've had, some of the best competition that we've had at these tournaments have been in those middle classes. You get two guys that are, there's a couple of guys that come to mind. I hope it's okay to mention names, but Bob Sales and John Maraska. Over the years, these guys they are senior casters, but they'll be out there banging at 650 feet. And I've seen a time where there was a foot between them for the class champion, for the class title. And those those things are great when you get guys that are that close in skill and age and still got that competitive drive, and they're out there banging away to try to see who's best.
And so we have all the rules for these tournaments as far as line, equipment. Also, I think the class system and the specific distances are laid out on the website as well. But in general, what equipment should someone be sure to have, or maybe you just recommend when they're wanting to come out to their first tournament? Like we're talking about rods, reels, line, extra accessories. I mean, they're going to already have a lot of this stuff already if they're surf fishermen, correct?
The biggest thing, if I had to tell you one thing, the biggest thing is make sure that you're using the correct line. Line diameter is crucial, and each sinker weight has an associated line diameter that goes with it. I'm not going to quote those right now. It's all on the website, but we have a board that we put up that shows line diameter per weight class. In other words, a 100-gram sinker, well, I can quote it, 100-gram sinker is 0.25 or 0.26 millimeter minimum diameter. 125 is 0.28, 150 is 0.31, and the 175 or 8 ounces is 0.35. That's the thickness of the line. That has to be correct. And we also require high vis line. The reason for that is so you can see it and find it when you have a break off, because break offs happen. Plus, when you're winding out, the clear line just kind of disappears and you end up stepping on somebody's line. We will supply you a shock leader if you need it. We've always got high vis shock leader that you can use that's of legal diameter. The shock leader also has to be legal. Everything has to be monofilament. We don't cast braid in these tournaments. And there's, I've been asked 100 times why can't I throw my braided line on my spinning reel? Well, you can't measure braided line. Braided line collapses. You can't really measure it, and we want a level playing field for everyone involved. As far as the rest of the gear, you can literally come out there with any fishing rod you want. What I would suggest one to do would be to pick their favorite fishing rod that they feel they throw the best, that they have got the most distance with. Pick the appropriate sinker that corresponds with that rod and what you feel good with. Make sure you got the right line on it and go cast. It doesn't matter whether it's a spinning reel or a bait casting reel. Typically, most guys who are serious about this do use bait casters. And that's a whole nother story tuning bait casters. I mean, you can go so deep. I've got reels right back there in the box that I can tighten the drag, back the magnets off, flick it, put it in free spool, and put it on the desk, and 5 minutes later, still spinning. That's the degree that you can go to, but you don't need to go there out of the box to have fun. What happens is guys go to a tournament and they see people who are really throwing far, and they say, well, I want that rod or I want that reel. And what I try to tell them is you may or you may not. That might be too much for you. It's very, very important to match a caster's body size, their physical attributes, their strength, whether they're big and strong and slow, or whether they're quick and nimble. There's a lot of factors that go in, whether they throw a high swing, flat art, ground cast. There's a lot of factors that go into rod selection. And I think you and I have had some of these conversations, but you've just got to work through a process to find what works best for you. So what I tell people is don't jump out there and buy the latest, greatest, stiffest, baddest rod that Will Nash or Ryan Lambert are throwing because you think that's going to get you where you need to be, because there's an old saying, if you can't bend it, you can't send it. And if a rod is too stiff for you, it's a bad situation. There's very few good things come out of a rod that's too stiff. So, and it's an evolution from the time that your first casting tournament through this evolution, you'll learn what you are best with. I've got right here on this wall, I bet there's 10 or more, maybe 12 tournament casting rods, and they're just where I went through an evolution over 2 decades, where I learned now. Now I've got rods that I can't cast because I'm not man enough to bend them anymore. So it's an evolution.
So as far as actual casting, I think short of hiring you for personal lessons, your DVD, The Comprehensive Guide to Power Casting, is the easiest to understand and yet also effective material I've ever seen out there for beginners and also advanced casters. Briefly, what are the main principles that you're teaching in person and on that DVD to give people a head start on down that path?
Okay, Matt, I appreciate that question. About 4, maybe 5 years ago now, I was still pretty much at the top of my game, but I could tell that my skills were starting to erode. I wanted to capture what I had learned and what I knew while it was still strong in my mind. So I hired a professional production company, and basically they followed me around for a week up at Cape Hatteras, and we picked some really cool spots to produce this DVD. And I had worked on it for a long time to break it down to 5 fundamentals of power casting. These are things that I teach people. If you come to me for a lesson, well, I shouldn't say you. If you came, you could easily be in some advanced pendulum stuff. But when somebody comes to me for a lesson, often they're like, okay, I want to learn that whirly gig spin around pendulum cast. And I'm like, no, you don't want that. That's not what we're going to do here. You need to learn how to use your body. You need to learn the 5 fundamentals before you step into that realm. So the 5 fundamentals of power casting is really the key to it to me. And the DVD is the catalyst that I used to try to get that out there. And I really appreciate you telling me it's the easiest to understand, because that was my goal. I had seen every casting DVD out there, and I'm not taking a shot at anybody that's ever made one, because there's excellent information on there. And some of them go into more advanced stuff than what I did, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to keep it for the fisherman. I wanted to keep it for the guy who's trying to improve his casting skills and his ability. Well, I can break it down into 5 fundamentals, and I'll cover them briefly, and then we'll move on. But and I'll start with what I consider to be the secret to distance, and this is not even a fundamentals. The secret to distance is learning to put the rod and hence the sinker to the largest possible arc that you can generate, accelerating through that arc, finishing with a burst of power and speed late. Start slow, finish fast. That truly is the secret to distance. Now, how do you get there? How do you do it? First fundamental is your footwork. Footwork is the foundation of success. You got to have a solid base from which to cast. If you don't have a solid base, you're pretty much done from the start. If you don't have solid footwork, solid repeatable footwork, you're not going to do the same thing every time. In other words, you may start out one time with your feet in a certain position. The next time you step up there, your feet are different. This affects a lot of things. It affects power tremendously, and it also affects accuracy tremendously. You always start with correct and proper footwork. Not going to take the time to go into each individual part of that, but just understand that footwork is the foundation to success. Fundamental number 2 is your body. Footwork is the foundation of success. The body, your body is the engine that powers the cast. People think it's all arms. That's where I develop my power. Your arms are weak compared to the large muscles of your body, your thighs, your core, your chest, your shoulders. Everything flows through your body. It's like imagine a spring uncoiling from the ground up. I had a good friend of mine who's a martial arts master. When I was up and coming, I went to him and said, John, can you teach me how to transfer? He was a weapons master. Can you teach me how to transfer power through my body into this stick? And he spent time with me and really helped open my eyes to understand it. The power comes from the ground. It's not out of you. It's coming from the ground through you. So it starts at your feet, through your legs, through your torso, your hips, your feet, legs, hips, torso, chest, shoulders, arms are the last thing to come through. That is one big uncoiling spring. And when you can get that down pat, it makes a huge difference. So we got the footwork, foundation of success, body, it's the engine that powers the cast. Fundamental number 3 is your arms. Your arms are a connection between the engine and the stick. Your arms are the connecting rods between the power, the engine, and your stick. Your arms, if it's done properly, your arms are passive through the first 90% of the cast. They're extended out and away from your arms. Your body is uncoiling. Your arms are kind of along for the ride as you come through. The last 5 to 10% of the cast, when your arms are extended out away from your body, your left is in front of your face, and you pull with it as you punch with your right, that's when you apply power with the arms. It's the punch pull at the end of the cast. It's where you really apply the violence, where you apply the power, but it's the last step of the acceleration process. Start slow, accelerate through using your body to generate speed and power, and then hit with your arms last. So footwork, fundamental number 1, body, fundamental number 2, arms, fundamental number 3, remember with your arms, keep your arms extended. Extend your arms away from your body, keep them there until the very end of the cast when you apply the punch pull. When you hit that punch pull, that's when you apply the power with your arms. Up until that time, they're passive, staying extended. Those are the 3 fundamentals that really apply to your body and physically what you do. The 4th fundamental is acceleration. And this is something that I've spent a lot of time in a private lesson on because people don't get it. People think it's time to cast, it's time to knock the crap out of it, it's time to hit it, it's time to really apply the power from the start. And a question I asked these guys when they, at first I said, how many times, especially if they're throwing a bait caster, how many times have you burned your thumb white? Have you burned it to the point that it's white? You have melted monofilament in the pad of your thumb and skin melted into the monofilament. How many times does that happen? And they said, well, yeah, that happened, but I don't know why it happens because you apply the power too soon. If you're throwing, it doesn't matter. 4 ounces is not that bad, but if you're throwing 6 or 8 ounces, especially 8 ounces, and you apply the power too soon, you're going to burn the pad of your thumb because that thumb is not strong enough. Your hand's not strong enough to keep that spool from rotating under, so it's going to burn. I'll give an analogy. This is something that a lot of car guys get this. Imagine you're sitting at a dead stop in a Corvette, Ferrari, whatever, in my case, an old GTO, and you've got a sweeping left-hand curve in front of you, and your objective is twofold. Number 1, to get through that curve as fast as you can, and number 2, don't wreck the Ferrari. Okay, are you going to put your right foot on the floor with 600 horsepower under that hood, are you going to put your right foot on the floor to start? The answer is no. If you do, you're going to spin the tires, you're going to break traction, you're going to end up in the ditch. It's the same thing with your thumb. If you apply that power too soon with that sinker at a dead stop or barely moving, your thumb's not strong enough. It's going to lose traction. You're going to spin and burn that thumb. And then with the car, once you get it rolling, you start slow, you accelerate through this curve, you come out the other end at full throttle. Same thing with a cast. You start slow, you get the sinker moving. The sinker, if with a ground cast, the sinker will drag along for about 3 feet. Then it elevates, it comes off the ground, starts to kick outside. All of this takes place in an acceleration mode. In other words, you're not killing it from the start. You get the sinker moving, using your body to do so. Once you get the sinker in motion, apply acceleration and finish with a burst of power and speed late. Start slow, finish fast. The last fundamental is a number, and that number is 45 degrees. 45 degrees comes up over and over and over in casting. It starts really with your footwork. Proper footwork, in my opinion, starts with your right foot. If your right foot was in the center of a clock face and your left foot was on target, in other words, at 12 o'clock, if you move that left foot over 45 degrees, it's going to give you an open stance, kind of like an open baseball stance. That allows you to get your body turned through and address the target and hit it hard at the end. 45 degrees is also your target. Your target in the sky is 45 degrees. It's not the horizon. It's not a wave. It's not a sandbar. You need to pick a spot. You need to pick a directional target, which would be the sandbar or the wave. And then look 45 degrees above that in the sky. That's where your energy needs to flow to that point. It's also where you need to stick the rod. And when I say stick the rod, when you finish your cast, boom, you need to be pointing the rod tip at that target. If you over rotate, bring the rod over here, which I see a lot when people are trying to cast hard, they'll cast way over here, then they'll jerk the rod back up. That's a recipe for a bird nest. It's going to give you a bird nest a lot of the time, unless you got a very, very slow reel. And then the last application of the number 45 degrees is when you come around, your longest distance is not going to be with a direct overhead thump. It's not going to be with a flat side on cast. Your arc or sinker path or rod path needs to be halfway between those two at 45 degrees as you come through. In other words, not overhead, not flat side on, but halfway through is where the rod path should come through to the finish. And those are the 5 fundamentals. If you get those 5 down pat, I promise you, you're going to pick up distance. I don't care where you are on the scale. If you're a 200-foot caster, if you're a 400-foot caster to start, you're going to gain distance if you follow these 5 fundamentals.
Okay, excellent. So now that we have the gist of what the sport is all about, we've got the equipment we need, we've got an idea of how to use it. Just briefly walk us step by step what somebody can expect when they pull their truck up and, or in my case, an actual car, and to a Carolina Surfcasters Association tournament.
Okay, the biggest thing is show up. One of the hardest things that I do is get people to come. I talk to people on the beach all the time. In person, I tell them to come. They're like, "Well, I don't know. I'd be intimidated. I'm not that good. Blah blah blah." There's a lot of different excuses not to come. But so the biggest number one thing is just to show up. Show up. Bring your rod. Bring your reel. I promise we'll help you. You know, after a few tournaments, you won't need our help. You'll be ready to step out there on your own and do everything you need to do. But I promise we'll help you. Second step is to register. Just come up to the tent. I'll be sitting there, or somebody will be sitting there, and we'll take your money, and then we'll get you registered and get you set up. We explain all the procedural things during a pre-cast meeting. We have a pre-cast meeting before every day of every tournament. Some of the old timers, they give me the eye roll because we're doing this again. But I think it's important to remind people every day of the importance of the procedures of what we do, with number one being safety. You've got to be careful in what we do because we're throwing a projectile. So there's certain things you can and cannot do when you're throwing it. But that's all procedural stuff we cover in the precast meeting. After that, we set a casting order based on either known factors from previous tournaments, or if you're brand new, we ask you to give us just a guess estimate of of how far you think you cast. So we set a casting order, and then we'll call those names off. You step up to the, we call the starting line in Aki. And you step up to the Aki, there'll be 3 sets of cones, one in the center, one 15 degrees left and one 15 degrees right of center. And you cast. You just got to be within the left and right boundaries. We'll have cones every 100 feet. And you cast, you walk out to your sinker, winding as you go. When you get to your sinker, you plant your flag with your name and sinker weight on it in the hole that your sinker made. And then at the end of the day, we measure. And you will have a laser measured distance that'll go down in the records. So that's how we do it. Basically, after the casting order is set, we cast.
All right. Well, you've helped us immensely in understanding what the long distance casting sport is all about and how to get started, or maybe even just take the opportunity to hone your skills for your next trip to the Outer Banks. So let's wrap this up, I guess, in the spirit of Jeff Foxworthy. Please complete this phrase and try to include as many answers as you can. You might want to check out a long distance surf casting tournament if
you want to improve your catch ratio. Number 2 would be your buddies outcast you and let you know it. There's a lot of ribbing that goes on between surf fishermen. You think you're good and you want to prove it, or you just want to improve your cast. Those would be the Jeff Foxworthy answers I would have.
All right. Well, Tommy Farmer, this has been excellent. We thank you and salute you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And again, appreciate everything you're doing now to promote and help the sport of casting.